Last week in Boston, we had some days where it was 7 and 8 degrees. And when we left on Friday, there was snow on the ground. So we are happy and excited to be in warm Las Vegas. Now, and I say that because you guys need to recognize 40 and 50 degrees is really not that cold. I know it is to those of you who live here, but you need to visit the East Coast, and you will have a renewed appreciation for 40 and 50 degree days. I am thankful we haven't had to put on any long coats since we've been here yet. But again, we are thankful to be here with you guys on tonight. Now, if you're not at Exodus chapter 2, please go ahead and turn to Exodus chapter 2, and we're going to be dealing with the verses 11 through 22. Exodus chapter 2, verses 11 through 22. And tonight we're going to look at a segment from the life of Moses. And for those of you who have studied Moses, you know that Moses' life can be divided into periods of 40 years. 40 years he was in the household of Pharaoh. 40 years he was out in the desert of Midian. And then another 40 years he was leading God's people. And so we're looking at a segment in his life where he comes to himself, or comes in an awareness of who he is, and then there's some complications that occur. I want to use as a subject for tonight's lesson, bouncing back from a midlife crisis. Bouncing back from a midlife crisis. Now I need to, before I launch into that, I need to define what midlife is, because some of you out there, you're in midlife right now. And then some of you are just over the hill. Now, midlife is 40 to 65 years of age. 40 to 65, that's midlife. Now, if you 39 and under, 66 and older, you're in a different state. But we're familiar with the term midlife crisis or midlife. So when you're in your midlife, you get to a point where you can no longer do what you used to do. Some of you brothers ought to be able to relate to that. You think, your mind tells you can do some things. Sometimes you want to go out and play basketball with the youngsters, or you want to do a bunch of heavy lifting at your house to try and impress your wife or somebody. And then you do those things, and then the next day, you're all sore and stoved up, can't hardly walk. But you were macho the day before. In Boston, we do a church picnic every August. And we always have these old fellas who want to go out on the baseball baseball field or go play football with these teenagers. That's on Saturday. And then come Sunday morning when we gather for worship, they can hardly lead us because they're all stoved up and tired and bent out of shape. But when you get to midlife, you really can no longer do what you used to do. And for some people, that's hard for them to understand that. It's hard for them to recognize you're no longer at your peak. You may think you are, but time is taking a toll on you. When you hit midlife, relationships, they change. A lot of people wait until they get midlife before they get a divorce because they're trying to recapture what they had 20 or 30 years ago. Now, mind you, if they had done what they were supposed to do and kept the home fires burning, you wouldn't be going through the crisis. But they're at that point where she doesn't look as good as she used to look, or he doesn't look as handsome as he used to look, and so you now want to replace him with somebody who's a lot younger who you think you can handle. Or people get to a point in midlife where you just settle in your marriages. We just not happy, but we can't divorce, so we just going to stay together until one of us dies. You guys know how we do it. You just tolerate one another. If you're single and you're in midlife, you begin to recognize your prospects for finding a spouse are slim. Not that they're none, but they are slim. And you begin to wonder, my biological clock is ticked on out. What am I going to do? And sometimes single people start making some bad relationship decisions. You start grabbing somebody just so you can say you got somebody. And you end up with a whole lot of trouble behind that kind of stuff. Or when you're at midlife, most of us you've had children, your children are grown. And if they're not gone, they're on the way out the door. And so you've spent the last 20 years organizing your life around these children. Taking them to school, taking them to sporting events, taking them to the football games or whatever sports activities or musical events that they're participating. And now they're out of high school and they're in college or they have moved out. What you gonna do? And I would say, parents, don't build your life around your children because they are going to grow up and they're gonna move out. As a matter of fact, you ought to want them to move out. That's how God intended this. You got a 40 or 50-year-old still living with you? Unless they're there to help take care of you, something's wrong. Because God has made us so that as we start maturing, we want to fly the coop. You want your freedom. You want your own space. You want to be able to come in when you want to. Some of you young adults, you know that's true. You don't say it in front of your parents, but I understand. And so all of this sort of happens to people in midlife, and because now you have a new normal. If you're not careful, you won't adjust well to it. Now these are the physical things that happen in midlife, but people have midlife crisis on a spiritual level also. And we're going to talk about that a little bit before we get into the sermon. But one of the things that you soon come to understand is that some dreams you had are just not going to come true. They're not going to come true. So, brothers, if all your life you want to be an NFL player, when you get 40 and 45, if you're not NFL, it's not likely to happen. You sisters who think you're fine, and you had an aspiration of being Miss Universe or Miss America. When you get to this stage, those are just fond memories. They're just not happening. Again, so it's a realization that there's some dreams I had, some aspirations I had, they are just not going to come true. And so I have to reorder my thinking and reorder my world to the reality of where I am now. Now, let me just use this as an opportunity to do a little pop quiz here. So you might be in your midlife crisis and just say amen if this sort of hits where you are. Some people get exercise crazy when they get in midlife. They're trying to do things with the body. Now, there's nothing wrong with reasonable exercise, but this body is on its way to the grave. You need to recognize that. So you can slave in the gym all you want to. That will make you feel better, and it may help you lose a few pounds, but it's not going to reverse where you are in midlife. Some people get at this point and they just dissatisfied with their career, their job, and they want to start a new professional endeavor. But sometimes they don't think about you're not qualified to do what you want to do. Because this new endeavor may have required, maybe you need to have gone back to school and gotten some skills. But people, they want to change. In Boston, you guys don't have this in Las Vegas, but in Boston, we have some midlife women who dress like their daughters. And every now and then we have to do one of those lessons on how a seasoned Christian woman ought to dress. I'll let that sink in. Some of you brothers, you get to the point where you got to have your fast car. You got to go out and get involved in risky behavior to still prove you still got it. Some married people, when they get to midlife, they get involved in extramarital relationships because the fire is gone in their marital relationship, and they got to rekindle that. Or so they think. Folks start lying about their age. Now, I don't know about any of you. I am happy to be the age that I am. I'm not going to say what it is publicly, but after the sermon is over, come up and talk to me and I'll tell you how old I am. But I'm amazed, you get in the conversation with people, you start talking about age, and they get all mad at you. I know none of you want to do this, but there are people who get climbing an airplane. The airplane goes up in the sky, and they jump out of it. None of you guys would do that, right? No. You don't have anything to prove, okay? You start counting those gray hairs. Now, it is amazing to me, there are some sisters and some brothers in Massachusetts who are much older than I am, and their hair is just black. Now, I know what they're doing to keep it black, but I'm wondering, why not embrace who you are and where God has placed you? Because there are many people your age who are dead and gone. Why are you trying to act like you're 10, 20, 30 years younger? Okay, maybe some of you. Start spending more money on vitamins and supplements. You're at the health food store and the vitamin store more than you're any place else because you're trying to recapture something that has already gone by. Now, if you can appreciate that, then you ought to be able to appreciate where Moses is in our text. So if you'd open up your Bibles to Exodus chapter 2, we'll start reading at verse number 11. That was just to set the stage for what we're going to talk about related to Moses. Now, it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown, and underlined was grown, that he went out to his brethren and looked at their burdens. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So he looked this way and that way, and when he saw no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. And when he went out the second day, behold, 2 Hebrew men were fighting. And he said to the one who did the wrong, why are you striking your companion? Then he said, who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? So Moses feared and said, surely this thing is known. When Pharaoh heard of this matter, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian. And he sat down by a well. Now the priests of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water, and they filled the troughs to water their father's flock. Then the shepherds came and drove them away. But Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. When they came to Ruel, and Ruel, you will learn in chapter 3 of Exodus, is Jethro. When they came to Ruel, their father, he said, how is it that you came so soon today? And they said, an Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the shepherds, and he also drew enough water for us and watered the flock. So he said to his daughters, and where is he? Why is it that you have left the man? Call him that he may eat bread. Then Moses was content to live with the man, and he gave Zipporah, his daughter, to Moses. And she bore him a son. He called his name Gershom, for he said, I have been a stranger in a foreign land. Moses encounters a crisis while he's in Egypt. The text says, when he was full grown. So there's a lot that happens to people when they think they are grown. Anybody got any teenagers, 16, 17, 18-year-olds in your house who think they're grown simply because they're a teenager? Now, those of us who lived a while, you know, a 16, a 17-year-old, 18-year-old, or a 19-year-old is not grown. Yeah, they're legally an adult. Physically, they look like an adult, but mentally, they aren't. Now, I hate to say that for some of you in that age group, but that's the reality. Your body tells you one thing, but your mind is not functioning like that of somebody who's really grown. But your hormones are raging, and you think you know sometimes more than your parents do. So in our text, Moses encounters this crisis when he thinks he's grown. The text says he came out to see what was going on with his people. Now, Moses had an interesting story. You guys know the story. His parents hid him for a period of time. They put him in a basket. He's found by Pharaoh's daughter, and he's raised in Pharaoh's house. So Moses, At the time of this passage, we can go to Acts chapter 7, verse 23. Moses is 40 years old. And we know that Moses is well educated. He is rich. He has a title. He's somebody in terms of the world's accomplishments. And everything looked like it was going well with him. But something was growing up and developing in him and welling out that he wanted to break out. And again, when individuals think they are grown, they feel like they're ready for challenges. They feel like they're ready for challenges even though mentally they aren't. And it's only until they get into the challenges and they make some bad decisions that they're able to see, I'm not where I think I ought to be. And can anybody relate to what I'm talking about? Any parents? So there's a situation that occurs here in the text, starting with verse number 12. Moses comes out and sees a Hebrew he sees an Egyptian abusing a Hebrew. Notice in the text, Moses kills him. Now, was that really the only option Moses had? To kill a man? He's prince. Could he have not just looked the other way and kept on going? Could he have not called somebody else to deal with the situation? He had some options. He didn't have to kill the man. When you're young and immature, sometimes you don't think clearly what your options are before you act. And you end up having to deal with some consequences that you're not prepared for. So Moses kills the Egyptian. He hides him in the sand because he thinks that's going to solve that problem. Guess what? Another day occurs. Now he sees two Hebrews arguing. And it's interesting, one of the Hebrews says, are you going to kill us like you did the other person? So Moses thinks what he had done was a secret. Now he knows the secret is out. And everybody knows what I've done. Now Moses knew that the penalty for killing an Egyptian was death. So that's what Moses decides to do. I got to get out of town. I got to move away. I got to get out of here to protect my life. Because he was not ready to deal with the consequences of his actions. Now, we all know the backstory. The backstory is God is ultimately getting Moses prepared for the work that he has for him to do in another 40 years. But Moses is not aware of that right now. He is simply responding the way somebody in his age who thinks they're grown does things. So he's forced to leave the country. It's hard to leave the familiar when you're not ready to leave the familiar. It's hard to be forced into doing something that you're not ready for. And I say that because many times, from a parent's perspective, we allow our children to make some choices that they're not prepared for. See, every child who wants to go to college on the other side of the world is not prepared to go there. What they're trying to do is get away from you. But they're not necessarily spiritual enough to be out there by themselves and still do the right thing. Now, I know every parent would like to think when you send your child off to college, they go to church services every Sunday. You need to sneak up on them wherever they are. Just show up on a Sunday. Show up at the place that they're supposed to be worshiping at, and you may be surprised. So just because a person is grown doesn't mean they're ready to go out on their own. That's the point I want us to begin to see. So Moses flees, and he ends up in Midian. So now there's another encounter that he has. The daughters of Jethro are coming to water their animals at the community well. And they are being hassled and harassed by some other shepherds. And Moses comes to the rescue of them, and he assists the women in watering their flocks. Now notice how Moses responds here. Do you read where he killed any of these people? No, so he has a much more measured response. He simply defends the honor of the women. And they are able to get the water, they water their flocks, and everybody goes about their business. A much different response than just a few days prior when he killed somebody. So you can begin to see Moses' thinking is changing. And what we want to do in our crisis is that we need to start thinking more. And begin to recognize that there's more way to do this thing than what maybe my past actions have shown me. That there's maybe some options that I hadn't been considering before. So Moses, as a result of helping these sisters, they tell their father about what's going on. And the father's surprised. And he says, why do you bring the stranger home? So I can reward him. I can acknowledge what he's done. Interesting thing, they say an Egyptian helped us. How did they know he was an Egyptian? Because of how he looked, how he dressed. People know us by our behavior, how we act, how we dress. And even when you're in a strange land, you need to be considerate or concerned about how you are perceived by the people there. That's why it ought not matter, Christians, children of God, when we're out of town, when we're traveling somewhere, we are who we are. So we don't let the environment determine who we are. We're God's people. So wherever it is we go, we're going to act like we're God's people. Even if when we go somewhere, the people around us don't act right, we ought to be acting right. So the text will say, when we get to verses 18 and 20, that Jethro rewarded Moses for what he had done. He rewarded him by bringing him home, and ultimately he ends up giving him his daughter. They're married and they have a child. Now, you need to recognize that the flow of chapter 2, there's a lot of time compressed into just a few verses. Because you guys know you don't get married and then the next day a baby comes out. There's at least 9 months up in there. So there's a period of time that Moses is going through where, one, he is becoming adjusted to the new environment that he has. He is becoming adjusted to living in Midian. He settles down, and it appears he's comfortable. He is able to establish a life where it seems like he has a purpose, he has another family. Now, Moses is comfortable. But that's not the end of the story. Because you can go to a strange land and get comfortable there and think that that's all there is to it when the Lord still has more work or more work to do in your life, because God is trying to get Moses somewhere and God is trying to get us somewhere also. So it's interesting, Moses runs away from Egypt, runs into the desert of Midian. In a few short years, he's going to be sent back to the very place he was running from. Sometimes in this life, the boomerang effect occurs. The very place you're running away from, the very situation you're running away from, God sends you right back there. But notice, when God sends you back there, you're a different person. Moses, when he goes back to Egypt, will be entirely different than the Moses that came out of Egypt. Because at this point in Moses' life, God's not finished with him yet. So Moses' crisis occurs when the situation developed where he kills this Egyptian. All of us have crises in our life. And they don't all occur just because you have a bad experience with somebody or you kill somebody. They're not limited to just the old people. Young folk have midlife crises also. They're not in the middle of their life, but they have crises. Okay, can you remember back to your first love? I know some of you got to go a long way back. Your first boyfriend, your first girlfriend. When you were a teenager, And that thing didn't work out. You thought your life was ruined when he and she went their way. For a teenager, that's a crisis. And I would say for some teenagers, you take their cell phone away from them. That's a major crisis for them. But the point being that midlife crisis is not just limited to old people. Young people have crisis also. You see young people, 18, 19-year-old, they graduate from high school, they also graduate from the church. There's a crisis going on there. Many times in people's midlife crises, that's the time they find Jesus. So there are a lot of people who found Jesus in the midst of trouble and challenges in their life. Many people have found Jesus when family problems come along, or when the death of a family member comes along, because now you got to reorder your priorities and recognize, I got to go on in spite of this situation being the way it is, or this person no longer being here. So crises can provide an opportunity for new opportunities. You guys remember the story of the prodigal son? That boy found himself, after all his money was gone, after all his feelings were gone, and he was getting ready to eat slop. I would say, stop trying to save everybody. Some folk need to hit rock bottom so that they can learn the lessons from their crises. And we got a whole bunch of parents growing up today who try to do everything for their children. That's why they're spoiled rotten and they can't make any decisions without you. Well, what are they going to do when you die? Nobody else is going to do everything for them. Now, it comes to a point where your child ought to clean up their own room. They ought not have maid service at home. There comes a point where if he or she doesn't want what you're cooking, then they need to find a way to find them some food. There comes a time when they won't wear the clothes that you buy with your money, then I guess they just won't have anything to wear. Because we're spoiling a generation. We're spoiling them so much that they don't know how to dress even when they come to worship. Well, that's another sermon, so I won't even go down that road. So many times people find a marriage partner when they're in the middle of crisis. You're tired of chasing every skirt that comes along. You're tired of being victimized by every man you meet. You're tired of worrying about AIDS and STDs. And you begin to recognize, I need to settle down. But sometimes you got to be used and abused by some folk to come to the realization that these fellas you messing with, these women you messing with, they're not the ones, especially when they're not even God's people. Well, when you come to your midlife crisis, let me give you 4 suggestions of some things we all need to do. Recognize, first of all, that a midlife crisis can be a new beginning. Some of us need new beginnings. We have just messed up. We need to recognize we messed up, and we need a fresh start. And when God allows you to come through some things, and you have the opportunity to have this fresh start, be thankful for it. Amen. And now make the kinds of decisions you should have made a long time ago. Because some of us have been brought up, we know what's right, but in our rebelliousness, we have just done what we wanted to do. And there ought to come a point where you recognize that hasn't gotten you nowhere but more trouble. See, there comes a time when the Lord delivers you out of credit card debt. You need to cut them cards up and leave them alone. And recognize I am not disciplined enough to deal with having a high credit limit. You do, well, you guys know, you can charge up as much as you want to. There's a bill coming. But see this as a new beginning. Don't be afraid to allow the crisis to occur. See, many times we don't grow the way God wants us to because we're always running away from challenges. We're always running away from problems. Just like folks run away from a congregation because of this problem here. You go over there, they're going to have problems too. God shapes us and molds us through adversity. If you think every day is going to be a good day because you're a Christian, you've lost your mind. Every day wasn't a good day before you became a Christian. The issue is now you have somebody on your side who can help bring you through. So recognize that there's a lesson to be learned as I go through my crisis. So don't be afraid to embrace it. And don't be afraid to acknowledge it. I am tired of dealing with church members. Every time you see everything is going good with me, this is the best day of my life. Liar, liar, pants on fire. We need to learn how to say, I'm having a bad day. Will you pray for me? I'm having a bad day, but I know it's not going to last. Let's be real. Because every Sunday you come up in here, every Wednesday you come up in here has not been a good day. But the Lord is still with you. And you don't have to lose your mind because things didn't go the way you thought they ought to. So don't be afraid to go through it. Use your crisis as a time to really get to know God. See, it's very easy to say, I love the Lord when the sun is shining, your bank account is full, your car got a full tank of gas, you can pay your car, all your bills and stuff like that. It's very easy to say, I love him, he's the head of my life and all that. But what you going to do when you lose your job? What you going to do when the car breaks down and you don't have enough money to get it repaired? What are you going to do when it's raining for more than one day? Use crises as a time to get to know God better. Because we've heard a whole lot about him. We've been in Bible classes where the teacher has taught us a whole lot about him. But just because we've been exposed to the information doesn't mean we have internalized it, we personalize it. And it's when you get into trouble, you need to know God for yourself. And it's not about calling the preacher or calling some Bible school teacher. It's about you ought to know God well enough in your crisis. And you ought to know his word well enough to pick it up and be able to look at some passages that will remind you God has not forsaken you. Remind you we got to trust him. Because many times our trust has not held up well through the test of times. So in Boston, it snows in the winter. You guys know that. And sometimes it snows on Saturday night into Sunday morning. We don't cancel worship services just because it snows. What we will do, if it's snowing up until Sunday morning, we will change the time of service so you can dig out. Because that's what they do during the week when folk have to go to work. You get to work a little bit later, but Boston doesn't shut down just because of snow. And so you got to help people to understand the kind of effort you would put to get to work, even when it's snowing and cold and ice. Because, you know, up there they say, it's too dangerous to drive to the church building. I never hear anybody say it's too dangerous to drive to work. So put your faith in action, even when it's inconvenient. See, the real Christians come to play when adversity comes along. So as you go through your crisis, use it as a time to really get to know and understand who God is, and the fact that he's with us no matter what's going on. And then be willing to be transformed. People want to become a Christian and stay the same. You cannot follow God faithfully without changing. You're going to let go of some beliefs and practices that you had. You're going to start embracing some things that you didn't do or believe before. You cannot stay the same. Transform. You got to be changed. Isn't that what Paul deals with in Romans chapter 12, 1 and 2? Based on what God has done for us, the least we can do is present ourselves as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, which is our reasonable service. And be ye transformed by your mind. So a Christian walk involves me and you changing. Now, if you've been in the church 20, 30, 40 years and you don't see any change in you, you need to be baptized all over again and go to the new converts class. Because you can't follow Jesus, read and study the scriptures without changing. You can't do it. And too many times we got people who've gotten in the habit of coming to church services, but they do nothing with the lessons that they hear. So that's why when problems come in their life, they act just like somebody who doesn't know God. See, we have a group of people in Boston who, when trouble comes in their life, real problem, they stop coming to church services. So they'll skip for about 2-3 months and then show up. And I always ask people, so what did you learn in those 2 or 3 months? Are you a better person? I already know the answer. The answer is no. And then I let them remind them, you have sinned by forsaking the assembly. So it's not just enough for you to now start coming back to church service. You need to come back and apologize to God. Because you need to know you can't walk out, okay, somebody living in your house with you leaves for 2 months and then 2 months later just shows up. Are you going to let them in the house without some kind of explanation? And it's going to have to be an explanation that's going to have to make some sense. Because in 2 months we may have changed the locks on the door. We got to start holding people accountable for how they handle problems. You don't split and walk away every time something doesn't go your way. In real life, we got to deal with stuff. You don't quit a job just because you don't like the supervisor. You stay there and deal with the supervisor. And if you're a good worker, you may be promoted to be supervisor. Now you can start doing all the stuff you said the other supervisor was guilty of not doing. But we got to learn how to bounce back. Now, there are 2 cooking instruments on the slide. The one on the right, I know you're familiar with, it's called a microwave. The one on the left is a crock pot. Now, we live in an instant generation where everybody wants stuff right now. Folk want to get baptized one day and be teaching Bible class the next day. It doesn't happen that way. You don't grow that way. It takes exposure. It takes a long period of time. So, but if you're used to just going to the microwave and putting your bag of popcorn in there or whatever it is and zap it and then, it comes out as hot, you don't appreciate what it takes to really produce a product. Versus if you use a crock pot. And some of you sisters, I'm sure you use it on Sunday mornings. You put your stuff in the crock pot so it can cook and simmer. And you turn it on in the morning, you go on to worship, and by the time you get back, it's all done. Long exposure, took some time, but it's worth it when you open up that top and you smell it and you take that first bite. You and I are crockpot Christians. Stop acting like you're a microwave Christian. You're where you are because God has taken some time and working with us and developing us and molding us and shaping us. That's years, not seconds. And the people who have the ability to stand when trouble comes are crockpot Christians. Folk who fall apart, who flake out, are microwavable Christians because they think everything can be resolved in a few minutes. See, that's the downside to watching some of these TV programs where major problems get solved in 30 minutes or 45 minutes. That's not real life. It may be entertaining to you, but that's not how it is. And you ought to know that from stuff that's going on in your life. When you had crisis in your life, it didn't change in a few hours or a day. Sometimes it took a few weeks. Now, let's be real, some of you husband and wife, you may love each other, but you've had some disagreements where for a while you walked around in the house and you weren't talking to each other. Okay, you guys are not going to tell the truth. That's okay. It's life. It happens. Doesn't mean you're bad. It just means there's a misunderstanding and somebody may have been hurt or disappointed to the bone, and it's going to take some time. That's why folk who tell you, well, I'm sorry, and you need to get over it. Okay, it doesn't work that way. Once you have injured me, hurt my feelings, I know I got to forgive you, but it's not going to happen. The feeling is not going to happen just because you said I'm sorry. I got to work that thing out of my system. And you got to recognize it's going to take me some time. We can bounce back from our midlife crisis, but we got to do something. So if you're going through something right now, you can bounce back from it. It's not the end of the world. God hasn't left you. He's going to work with you, but it's going to take some time. And you got to be patient and let him work with you. Because the finished product, when you take that lid off the crock pot, is worth it. Sister Lynn makes a nice beef stew in a crock pot. And so when in cold Boston, you need some hearty, hot food when it's 5 degrees outside and you just come in from shoveling snow. You can appreciate that. God works in our lives to bring out the best for us. But oftentimes, he allows us to go through stuff to produce that. So don't try to avoid the crises that come your way. Embrace them, work through them, because God is with you. And God will bring you out. He may use people, he may use circumstances, he may use time, or he may use all of those, but you'll be better for it. Tonight, as you reflect back on what I've shared in the lesson, do you have some crises going on in your life? I know Christmas is just a few days away, but that doesn't mean anything. Crises don't care that there's a holiday around. Crisis will come whenever crisis want to come. And we have to put into practice what we have been learning, what we know about the Lord and how he works in our lives. Because as soon as you get through one situation, just a few weeks later, another one is going to come. You guys do remember in Matthew chapter 4 where Satan was messing with Jesus. The text will say he left Jesus for a season. Okay, so your crisis go away for a season, but something else is coming up. And what you need to do is when the next crisis comes along, reflect back on how God brought you through the last one. So you keep your composure and don't act like he's forsaken you. So tonight, how good is your crock pot working? How good is your crock pot working? Do you even know where your crock pot is? I know sisters, you know where yours is. Brothers, do you know where the crock pot is in your house? Okay. If you don't, you ought to get to know it. Tonight, if you have a statement, you have a prayer request, you have a confession you need to make as it relates to your walk with God, we're going to give you the opportunity to respond now to the invitation as we stand and sing the song of encouragement. Let's stand.